I think as gamers we've perhaps been spoilt a little bit over the years. After playing some recent games like Sea of Thieves and Destiny 2, I just am left feeling wanting for more, and I'm consuming the content in those games so quickly. And I think, like a lot of others, that there just isn't anything interesting there in those games in particular to keep me playing. But then I think back to when I was younger and the simplest of games would keep me busy for hours on end. I played Counter-Strike pretty much every night, and if you look at the content in Counter-Strike back in the day, well, it's actually remained the same all this time. Sure, a few extra weapons have been added, matchmaking, some new maps, gun skins, etc, but the core game has remained pretty much the same. And we accept that because it's not a game that needs new content, it just works. Why then, when we play a game like Sea of Thieves or Destiny 2, are we not thinking the same? Why are those games different? Well, Destiny 2 for example, I was really excited for Destiny's arrival on PC, and there was this huge gap in the market ready for a game just like it. And then the game released and it was disappointing. It was just grinding out public events, and then you just did more public events and your weekly rewards, and then once you reached max level it was almost like, why bother playing? The PvP really isn't that interesting, and the PvE content was lacking. And I suppose someone would argue, well, just play for fun. Now if you find the core game mechanics fun, then surely that's why you're playing. Why do you need something else and something new all of the time to work towards to make the game exciting? Say I give you a mission in a game, and if you complete the mission you get a new weapon, but in the second scenario you get nothing. Does that really change the mission? Did you enjoy it less or more? Doubtful. As human beings, we just love things to work towards and we love to see progress. Challenges, missions, achievements, new weapons, skins, and it's come to a point where I think that we're heavily relying on those sort of things for our enjoyment in gaming. That being said, the core of a game needs to be entertaining to keep you active. And I think Destiny 2's core game was pretty bland. Similar enemies, not very exciting strikes, bar a few, and that let it down massively. Sea of Thieves I've covered recently in a big video, and I think that's a different monster entirely. The core mechanics of the game are phenomenal, the sailing is so good and relaxing that you sometimes forget you're playing a video game, but the main chunk of the game, the quests, are extremely tedious and boring. And that means that you just grind them out, and some people will do that, or you make your own fun by hunting down other ships and trying to PvP. The problem here is that I don't really want to pay full price for a game that needs me to find my own encounters to make entertainment. I think that I should be getting entertained in a video game doing what the game wants me to do, and then the encounters are just extra icing on the cake. Battlefield of course is another good example. BF1 now has over 30 maps. That's including all the DLCs and the base game maps that the game launched with. I honestly didn't even believe it until I counted them myself. That being said, we still want more. When is enough? Enough? That's the question of today's video. One of DICE's developers said the exact same thing in fact. We want more maps to keep us busy between now and whenever the next game is released, but is 30 maps not enough for us? Is 50 weapons not enough? Our attention spans nowadays are just so short for gaming. We play with a new weapon, then it becomes a thing of the past dead quick, and we need something new to occupy us because when games released 5 to 10 years ago, downloadable content wasn't a thing, it didn't exist. You may have had expansion packs, but they're a very different thing to DLC I think, and we're also few and far between. Now we live in an age where we know every game we play is going to have DLC 3 months, 6 months, a year down the line, and if we don't get it, we feel disappointed. BF1 for instance has another issue, so there may be 30 maps, but how many of those would you say are really good quality maps? I'd say around a third, personally. It is sometimes quality over quantity. Sure, there might be 30 maps, but if I don't like 20 of them, in reality, it's not 30 at all. On the flip side, what about single player? Some single player games release and we're perfectly happy and content to pay full price for the game, which is essentially going to deliver you many less hours of content. Let's talk about like the new Wolfenstein games for example, or the new Doom, although it's not that new anymore. Fantastic games, amazing single players, brilliant. Relatively short though, by comparison to a multiplayer title like Battlefield, and yet I think they're still great value for money, and I'm fine with having it as a play and done sort of game. I know Doom does have multiplayer for instance, but that's not really very interesting to me personally. We are just a fickle bunch of gamers, aren't we? I mean, look at Battlegrounds. We wanted a new map in PUBG for how long? I can't even remember, it felt like an eternity waiting for that. And then it released, and sadly, in my opinion, it was very poor. and now whenever I play Battlegrounds I long to play on the old map, and if I get into a lobby on the desert map, Miramar, I will just disconnect and re-queue until I play the original map. Luckily, that has another map coming out tomorrow, so that should be pretty interesting to see how that plays, considering it's a much smaller 4x4 map. The whole need for new content can span across new games too. I think I get tired and sick of games much easier and faster than I used to. I have to admit that I got bored of Destiny 2 pretty easily, same with Sea of Thieves to a certain extent, but I think it wouldn't be as bad if there was more to do. I played The Division for a while too, but then the story missions were just so uninventive and boring that I tired of that too. I played it through once with some friends and then never again. And there is another factor, of course, I just can't commit the time to some of these games that others can, as there just isn't enough time in the day as I'm too busy. Time is a big factor here too. Perhaps the longer you've been in gaming, the less interesting it gets, and it's really hard to find those unique, compelling experiences anymore. And also the fact that a lot of us have full-time jobs and we just can't commit the time to some of these games that others can. On the flip side, there are some games that do this brilliantly. Look at Fortnite, it's the current big thing. I love the game and I think they're doing a fantastic job at keeping players engaged with regular new game modes, weapons, skins, emotes. They're really leading the way of how to gain a player base, how to grow it exponentially and keep it, at least for now. Epic are doing a brilliant job with that. And it's not just the content, but also their communication with the people who play the game regularly. On social media, on their YouTube channel, on their blog, on their website, they're always letting their players know what's coming up, if there's a problem, what the problem is. Communication, it seems, is key. But I feel like Fortnite BR was a bit of an experiment for Epic Games and it really paid off. And in reality, most big publishers and games are heavily reliant on deadlines and meeting them. It's no longer a case of it will ship when it's ready. You've got investors, you've got publishers, they've got quarterly goals to meet and they all want a piece of the pie. And delaying a game is a huge deal to everyone involved. It has a massive domino effect. That means that if a game is due to release in August, then doesn't matter, that's when it needs to release, no matter what the state it's in. Bar from some very brave developers who simply have no choice but to delay their game or work it out with the publisher or the money people to make it work. Often though, when a game isn't delayed, it leads to it not being quite finished or not meeting to expectations. Features and content that perhaps should have been in at launch weren't, and that ends up hurting the game in the long run. Shigeru Miyamoto from Nintendo put it perfectly: a delayed game is eventually good, but a rush game is forever bad. Nowadays, with the power of social media, you just can't shake that first impression, and if you release a bad game or there's not enough content in it, then it's gonna sting. So many amazing games launch each year, but not many of them have much longevity anymore. I'm still waiting for a game that grips me for as long as Counter-Strike did back in the day when I was younger, but I don't think that will ever happen again. It was just so new and exciting, and it was a new form of multiplayer gaming really for me that captivated me, and my desire to get better and practice all of the time definitely helped with realistically there not being much content in that game. All of this makes me wonder though, if game developers had more time to make AAA games, let's say 3 years instead of 2, would people be playing them for longer? Let's go back to Battlefield as an example. Say that Battlefield 2018 comes out in October, and the game launches with 9 multiplayer maps, which is the usual amount for Battlefield games. That's pretty standard. But what if the game had an extra year of development time and instead launched with 15 maps? Plenty more game modes and weapons, plenty more customization options. What if the initial launch of the game included what we would usually anticipate after the first big DLC is released? How good would that be? And then, of course, you've got the monthly updates after that. I'd love to see there be a big swing of the pendulum like this for AAA games, and it could happen. More development time could mean less pressure and stress on developers, and you can assume that that means more and better content at launch, therefore keeping us hungry gamers playing and enjoying the games for longer before the first batch of DLC releases. Games like Sea of Thieves and No Man's Sky I think are great examples of this. If those games had another year, then when they launched, perhaps they wouldn't have been hammered on their lack of content so hard, and delivered on their promises of gameplay and met our expectations. Often nowadays I find that game studios are releasing almost concept gameplay videos, let's say, of what they want their game to be, but because of its launch date they just can't deliver on that promise, and when it comes out it's massively underwhelming. Now, speaking from my experiences, since I've been a YouTube content creator for the past 6.5 years, I've been invited to many different game studios to see work in progress games and give feedback on them. And not once have I seen a game that already had finished post-launch content to go before it was released. Most of the time the devs are still scrambling to get features into the base game and fix bugs, let alone building future content, and I think that's a big shame. If developers were given that extra year, let's say, then the base games themselves could launch with way more polished content and regular DLC updates for new stuff going forward, meaning that we'll get more content at launch to sink our teeth into before we get bored. It's certainly a very interesting topic anyways, and I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments below. When is enough content enough? Are there any recent multiplayer games in your memory in particular where you felt that they launched with enough content to keep you entertained and content until the first big DLC dropped, or a new map or something? I'm really struggling to think of any. Single player games on the other hand, like The Witcher 3, yeah, it's not really that new, but they did it expertly, no doubt. But in terms of multiplayer, it's harder to think of games which have hooked me for long enough before the new stuff is released. Either way, thank you so much for watching the video, guys. I hope you had a great weekend. If you did like the video, give it a like. If you disliked it, dislike. Subscribe if you want to see more like this, and I'll see you in the next one.